Relationships are such a big part of our lives every single day. And some of them can have conflict, but can we really have an open mind and come from a place of curiosity? We're living in a world where everyone thinks it's black and white, your side versus my side, and it's not that way. We can still be curious and understand. We don't have to necessarily agree, but we can still try to understand, and maybe we'll learn something in the process.
Welcome to Jagged Edge Podcast with Yogi Patel, where we're diving into challenges and solutions that impact our personal and professional lives. And today we're exploring a topic that's incredibly relevant to today's world of constant distractions, competing demands, constantly on the go. And we're joined by an expert, Cheryl. She practices mindfulness. Organizational productivity is something she can talk to us about. And we're together going to look at some strategies and habits that can help us prioritize better, remain mindfulness, and in turn, balance our productivity and solve various conflicts with ease. Cheryl, thank you for being here on Jagged Edge Podcast. And this is a leadership podcast for many of us who are caregivers and working in high demanding jobs. Tell us a bit about yourself and how did you get into this business? I know you personally, and I remember when you were working in finance in a high-powered position.
Yeah, thank you, Yogi. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm very excited to be here. Yeah, so like you said, I worked in corporate finance for about 28 years, also raising two daughters and managing a household and trying to balance it all, which is actually a myth. I'm not sure we can find balance with everything going on. And so I struggled a lot with overwhelm and burnout, just working long hours as well. And I started practicing mindfulness, which is really just self-awareness, just understanding my own patterns in my day-to-day activities and what I'm spending my resources on, right? Our attention, our time, and our money. And then along with that came self-compassion as well. So that really helped. That was a game changer for me to accept the difficult emotions that were present and then finding that fierce compassion of action to kind of get me to go so I wasn't always procrastinating as well.
Beautiful to hear how you've made this incredible shift. I can just see how you're glowing and sort of illuminating and just being your true self. Tell us a little bit about the strategies that you find most effective in helping individuals and teams prioritize their tasks to improve productivity.
Yeah, so I think it's really important, whether it's an organization or your personal life. I think we're all leaders in one form or another, right? To really know what our values are and our core values. And I think of core values as that compass in our life that guides us, right? And so for me, compassion is a core value. My health is a core value, right? Making impact in the world is a core value of mine. And so once we know that, most organizations have a strategic plan. Right? They have this overarching, what's our plan for the year, the next 5 years? And from that, you have goals. And from those goals, you have the tasks. Like, you break it down so it's not so overwhelming. And so when we know that, it's easier to prioritize. But the issue that we have, and you already said it, is we all have these competing priorities, right? And then we are so distracted. Right? We are always under pressure. We're always on. And there is so much information out there. We just don't know what to do. And we get distracted and we have busyness actually in our minds, right? We're constantly ruminating and getting overwhelmed. What I've found is that if we can just slow down, it can actually help us speed up. And I think that is really the key to just stopping and recalling what are our core values and our goals. And that's our priorities, right? Those are our priorities at that point. what happens is many times we go into what's called action addiction or go into doing mode, where we just start working, right? Because we're so restless, we're so impatient, and our minds are like, oh my God, I have 500 things on my to-do list and I need to start doing, as opposed to just slowing down for a moment.
Tell me, I'm intrigued by slowing down to speed up. What does that mean and how do we do that?
What is really helpful is, really planning. I like the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, right? Of 20% of the effort for 80% of the outcome. I use this matrix, it's all actually derived from Dr. Diana Hill, who's a psychologist, and she uses a wise effort matrix. And what she does is you have your core values on the horizontal axes, and you first start with the self-awareness of your patterns of how am I spending my time, right? There's the burnout and not worth it. And if we start to realize that, oh, maybe I'm multitasking too much, or I'm getting into a, email rabbit hole or something, we start to understand our patterns and we see, okay, is this serving my values? Is this serving my goals, right? That I need to do. And then we start to move more toward the right side of this matrix of, savoring, or is it worth it? Is what I'm working on really benefiting the end goal here? And so when I say to slow down, it's almost as if maybe in the beginning of the day, we take a few breaths, right? Mm-hmm. We get still. We start understanding the busyness in our mind and the anxiety in our body. And we just maybe for 5 minutes do some deep breathing or check in with the body, because our bodies are always in the present moment. Our minds are usually in the past or the future. So if we can get still in the present, then we can say, okay, what do I need to focus on right now? Let me get some clarity, right? And then maybe in the morning, we don't just jump into the emails, right? Or we don't jump into something that really isn't that important and that doesn't need to be done right now. And we do some deep work in the morning, critical thinking in the morning. Does that make sense?
So much sense, because first thing in the morning, as we know, the brain is at this optimal state and it's able to even allow us to form different habits. And this is the best time where, culturally for many, morning times are used for that moment of spirituality, whatever that might look like for individuals, right?
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yoga meditation doesn't have to be the only way that you get there, but it could be through small walks and just being aware of yourself and just having those moments. I appreciate what you said about there is no balance. We all chase this thing about balance. Tell me a bit more about what you are referring to. Like, we all want this life, work, everything balanced, but there is no such thing.
Right. Absolutely. I do think it's a myth. I think our lives are seasonal, right? Just like our work, right? It's different times. So I remember when I started working at a startup, and anyone that's worked at a startup in the finance world, it's crazy. I mean, the hours I worked, it was like 14-hour days, and my daughters were in middle school. So they, had a lot of activity. But at that point in my life, I really wanted this position, this career goal to work. So I focused on that. That was my priority. I mean, I still tended to the family, but my husband had to just do a little more, right? And so that worked out. And I made things like automation and efficiencies a priority here. So then after about a year, I was able to actually automate everything, slides and presentations I had to do, where then it kind of creeped into where my family took priority. And I was able to leave work at 4:00 to do that. So I do think that our priorities shift and, balance isn't always there, but we still can get those small moments of focus. Like you said, mindfulness is just self-awareness. So if that means I would just sneak a coffee break with a coworker in the middle of the day, right? Or just step outside because I was starting to get frustrated in my meetings and take a few breaths. right? Or just kind of look outside and feel nature out. Those are small snippets we can get. I think our priorities are constantly changing, and that's okay.
Yes. One of the things that you mentioned is that taking that time for that coffee break, when we're in that busy mode and want to bring value, those are the things that we avoid the most, that 5, 10, 15 minutes, because we think we're on this time crunch. And I appreciate what you just shared about taking that time. It's like me time, us time, that actually will add now more time. So I definitely now understand the whole picture. So how would teams review their goals and ensure? So we're talking about a company where we all have goals and priorities. And how could we be more effective creating tasks themselves? So in your case, you created some slides and kind of balanced whatever was going on in your family, raising your 2 children. Many companies, we have constantly shifting goals and we're chasing them. So where is that step one to just sort of say, okay, I'm being pulled and I'm going to pause, and where do I go from here?
That's a great question. And this has happened often when I was in corporate, and even now running my own business, it's happened. And I think the key in an organization is communication, really open communication. And so, like I said, you have the leaders at the top, right? You have the C-suite, you have VPs, and they make this strategic plan, and it trickles down. And I think it's important for in your department, let's just take it to the micro level. In your department, it's important for your manager to really communicate from the core values to the strategic plan to the goals and now to tasks. Right. And when there's competing priorities, which there always are, right? Because we have fire drills sometimes too. I think it's important for the employee, for the individual contributor or manager to actually ask, okay, I have A and I have B. What's most important right now? Like, what do I need to do? And I think it is the job of both people to really communicate and sit down and think it through. It's a dialogue. From what I know is sometimes we don't feel like we have enough time, and managers sometimes will just be like, just figure it out. It's all a priority. That's not realistic. That's when burnout starts to happen because we're trying to do too much and we don't know if we're working on the right things, and we slowly get burnt out. I was at a networking event and I think a CTO actually said that. She's like, sometimes my people don't even ask me, like, is this important right now? I'm working on this for this priority. And she's like, if people would just be more transparent about, how they feel, then I can give them more guidance. So I do think it goes both ways.
Yes, and often we get into this hierarchy position as an employee and leader and think that we have to manage the task. I appreciate what the CTO mentioned and what you're sharing. Just being able to say, hey, I have these 5 things on my task and I know this is a priority. However, I'm going to do this, and that. I think everyone would be, but that fear gets in on how we're going to show up, right? We're all constantly worried about perception of others, of us. And kind of sort of the perception is when you fail and when you can't get this work done is equally bad. So what would we choose? Perhaps we would choose our dignity or self-care, hopefully.
It's also important that leaders have a psychologically safe environment for their people to ask the question. Because to your point, sometimes people don't feel comfortable asking the question because they've been shut down and they have been told, just figure it out. Like it's all a priority. And they don't feel safe. And so I do think it's the leaders of an organization to foster the psychological safety, right? Which is really to be kind and present and direct as well, right? Direct and clear. So everyone understands what they need to do.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense to me because it's and both. So it works on both sides being as transparent and that communication piece. Lovely, lovely point. Now we all know, right? We're attached to our cell phones. We have the computer. We have the ding ding watches going on. So in this world of constant distractions and information overload, how do we manage these distractions? Because I know that my heart races sometimes, that anxiety pops in when you're doing something or you're speaking to someone, and that stress level goes up for me because I know all these other things that are happening and it takes my focus away. and then my priority and my mind changes. So how would we balance this overwhelming world of technology and finding that balance?
So Yogi, you sound like you have a lot of self-awareness of knowing when you feel a high amount of stress, right? You talked about what's happening in your body. And I think that is really the first step, is to just acknowledge, oh, wow, I'm kind of stressed right now. So many people don't understand when they're stressed because they're just doing. Again, that action, as opposed to just pausing for 3 breaths. It takes no time at all. And even saying to yourself, oh, I'm really stressed right now, right? And understanding even your thought patterns of ruminating. And I think once that happens and you know your patterns, being curious to it, right? And having some kindness towards yourself. Okay, I'm getting a Slack Teams coming. I'm getting an email. My phone is dinging. Maybe I need to turn off my notifications so I can focus on this right now. And many times we need to communicate that. Again, it's about communication. We need to communicate this to our managers, to our teams. Like, hey, I'm working on a really important project right now. I need to really focus. So I'm going to put my teams on do not disturb. I'm going to turn my email notifications off. If there's an emergency, please come by. Or, there's a way to get a hold of me. And I think that's really important. And that's self-compassion right there, to know what's happening for you and taking that action of, okay, right now, this is what I'm focusing on because I'm starting to get stressed, because everything's starting to come at me at one time.
What you're speaking about even would just had a thought that if we had this as a company norm, when we have meetings, we're going to focus and we're going to have our cell phones turned off. So when someone's looking for someone and the phones are turned off, it's an automatic assumption that they're really busy, and having that faith and trust in the psychological safety piece. So I think it doesn't have to be just individual. It could be a whole team that practices self-care and compassion and show up for one another. You lead mindful practice and you also teach this. Can you tell us what that might look like?
In the workplace, I work with teams and leaders that want to bring me in and really talk about what is the team's challenges. A lot of times it's prioritization. A lot of times it's communication, right? Having direct communication. I like to give actionable strategies and like to make all my workshops very experiential and learning from the group. So, we start with a, transitioning practice, I like to call it, to just settle down, because whenever we're coming from something else, our minds are still going, right? We rarely get a chance to catch up and just take a pause. And then, do a little bit of, didactic, meaning, I'm teaching some of the concepts, just like I'm talking here. And then really having the group have a discussion. I think it's important to bring the whole team in because we really learn from one another, right? And I also learn. And I think that's really important. And then just giving some takeaway strategies to practice. And I'm all about behavior change. I think a lot of this takes practice. I can talk about prioritization and everything makes sense, but how do we do it? How, right? How do we know our core values? How do we have these conversations with people? How do we slow down to speed up, right? How can we do that? How can we, maybe at the end of the day, we reflect, okay, what did I get done? What wasn't value added and wasn't serving my goals? And it's okay if we make some wrong decisions, because as long as we learn and grow from that. And so that's, how the programs look. And so we do it over a course of a few weeks so we can create small habits, nothing big. Like I said, taking 3 breaths doesn't take any time. And to your point, mindfulness doesn't have to look the same for everyone. It really is very different for each individual person.
So what are some of the strategies for prioritization of tasks that you can suggest? How can we improve productivity?
Some of them I've already, mentioned, such as just knowing what's important, what are the goals and what's contributing to those goals, right? And then that becomes your priority, right? Some are long-term. And so we kind of schedule those out. For instance, if we have a system implementation, right? So we know that's a priority and we kind of schedule that out. And then we have, things that come up, Like in this world, we have fire drills every day. I faced it all the time. And so when we have that, a practical strategy is, again, let's just take a pause as opposed to panic mode, because most people get into a panic mode, right? Like, oh my God, I have like how many things to do today? I don't have time for this fire drill. But if we can just take a breath again, notice what's happening in the body and say, okay, I need to work on this. This is important. This serves this priority. So it's high priority. And then just kind of shifting our attention and our focus. Right? I think planning is very important. Maybe the night before you would leave, what do I need to work on? Looking at our little matrix, or in the morning. Okay, what am I going to work on? Some strategies that I find helpful is scheduling deep work in the mornings. Like you said, we're freshest in the mornings. Maybe not just checking email. Most people just go straight to email, and it gives us that dopamine hit of like, okay, I'm checked this off and I responded. It feels good. But again, if we don't do that, we schedule email time. And maybe we do it at 9 in the morning and the afternoon, 3 times a day, and really focus on that deep work. I think when we have meetings as well, can we not multitask? Because multitasking is a myth, right? We actually get less done. We can only do one thing at a time. And it's actually switch tasking. It's our brain switch tasking from one thing to another. And it also creates a more distracted mind. Mm-hmm. So can we not be multitasking, writing an email while we're going to be it, right? Responding to a Slack or Teams message as well. Other things are simple things like scheduling in performance breaks throughout the day. So going for a walk, maybe not necessarily being on social media. Many times we'll get on social media as our break, but can we get away from our desk and just step outside? Nature does wonders for our focus and calmness, right? And in that kind of being mode, we actually can be more productive. We're giving our brain that break. So those are some strategies that we practice slowly. It doesn't take much, but it does. We're habitual beings, right? It's hard to change habits, but through neuroplasticity, we can change our brains to learn different behaviors.
And I think it's the time and pattern change that you're speaking about. I remember giving up a cell phone or going from checking emails all the time. We're also training others of what to expect from us, like a quick response. And if they don't receive that quick response, now we're creating this dependency. So having something like, I'm going to check my emails 3 times and you will have faith and I will get back to you. And I think that creating some of those balances or waiting time, it's really respectful to self and others in creating some boundaries. So how can we make better decisions more quickly and effectively?
When we are making decisions, if we use our, kind of visualization of our matrix, and if we know our patterns, we can see, okay, is what I'm doing right now contributing to the most important tasks or priorities, which again goes back to our values. And when we've made incorrect decisions, again, we learn and grow from them. We give ourselves some compassion and we think, how did this make me feel? How did this multitasking make me feel? How did constantly checking my email all day and getting into this rabbit hole make me feel? And shifting them, learning from that. I'm like, oh, that didn't feel good. I feel so distracted. I feel so stressed out. No. And then making the decision to, okay, I need to work on this task. I need to work on these slides. I need to work on automating this process so I can spend more time analyzing the data, right? Again, it's all about taking that pause and slowing down for a moment to overcome that action addiction, making a more intentional decision from a place of pausing instead of autopilot behaviors that we often go to, right? Because it's easier. Our brain likes that. It takes less energy to do that for our brains if we just go into our habitual way of working as opposed to trying something new, right? And being uncomfortable with that stillness for a little bit.
Any change is definitely uncomfortable until that becomes part of our norm. So how do we balance urgent tasks that constantly pop up that we spoke about earlier with the long-term goals for ourselves and our company when coming up with prioritizing. So I think one of the things that you said is communication, and also this hierarchy thing that I talked about earlier, where we feel really nervous or scared about not meeting someone else's need in that moment. So how do we take care of ourselves and show up?
That's a great question. And it's not always easy, right? No. And so it's really with the long-term goals, I think it's important to, make sure they're realistic and timely and really scheduling the tasks, right, for the long-term goals. Because we get overwhelmed in our head when we see this huge goal, right? Like, let's say a system implementation. So kind of scheduling out those tasks and really discussing, again, it comes down to communication, discussing with your managers and setting the expectation, even asking the question. I've often done this with people I reported up to. What is the expectation here? So we're both clear. Both parties are clear on this. And then when urgent matters do come up, right? So I knew when COVID hit and I was in the finance department at UCSD that, that was hard. We had to redo the whole strategic plan because now everything was going online. But that was also contributing to the goal of what my department did, right? So really kind of knowing that, okay, at this moment, I need to shift a little bit and having acceptance. I think acceptance is really important of this is how things are, right? We both said it, like urgent things always happen, whether it's at work or at home, right? Plans don't always work out. So we have to kind of hold them a little loosely. So, when we shift our focus, it is important, like you said, to kind of manage our own anxiety and panic that comes along and even communicate, okay, well, I'm going to put this aside, communicating to your manager so I can work on this.
One of the things that I get challenged with personally is leading a team and there's procrastination. And I go right into assumptions but how do we just then move from deliberation, procrastinating to really making deliberate decisions and moving on?
Yeah. So I think for procrastination, I think the solution to procrastination is really action. And action in the sense of small, digestible tasks. I think we get overwhelmed, and that's why we start to procrastinate. When we have fight, flight, freeze, we tend to freeze when things are too much. And it's like, oh my God, how am I going to do this project? We're thinking about the whole project as opposed to what is one thing I can start on? What is one thing I can do right now, right? So if we have to plan for a huge trip, let's say, right, a really long international trip, we all know how hard that can be. We can start slow and say, okay, let me just plan the first day. Let me just get the first hotel done. And so I think really procrastination can be eliminated if we just start doing something small. And the smallest thing can even be that awareness of, I'm just overwhelmed right now. This is a lot. And that's why I am going to Netflix instead of doing what I need to do right now, right? And once we can do that, we slowly put one foot, it's just like put one foot in front of the other. And before we know it, we've completed like 5 tasks going toward that goal. Does that make sense?
So much so. And I think the procrastination and discouragement kind of go hand in hand that you were just speaking about. And finding even a coworker or someone to say, hey, really, I just need help just starting this project because I'm just so overwhelmed. And is asking for help. I think it's also managing up and managing down. This can work both ways because we're all human beings at the end of the day, and we're all going to be good at some things, and in our mind at least, not so great at some of the other things. So you speak about Eisenhower matrix. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, mindfulness and workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So this Eisenhower matrix, which is similar to the wise effort matrix, can really help us slow down a little bit and plan, right? I think it's important to kind of plan. Putting tasks into different buckets can be really helpful because being visual and just the process of putting tasks in buckets is so important. So, the Eisenhower matrix has 4 quadrants, right? Mm-hmm. And so just understanding what's urgent and important, what tasks are urgent and important, and kind of putting tasks there. And then what's not so urgent, but it's still important, right? Something that maybe the goal is out a whole year, right? So it's urgent, but it's not important right now. It's not time sensitive in the next couple of weeks, putting tasks in that quadrant. And then what can we delegate, right? What's urgent, but not so important that we can, delegate to others. And then finally, what can we delete, right? What's not urgent and not important, right? And so that's when we look at things like that, and really look at it from that lens, that can also help with procrastination, right? So now we're actually taking the time to think about our goals and our tasks. And okay, what am I going to do? And again, holding it loosely because things are always changing. We know this as a society. Change is the one constant in our lives. And so we have to embrace it. We have to know it's going to happen. So really holding it loosely and looking at that matrix on a daily basis. We don't just do it and put it away, right? We get in a habit of, maybe putting it by our computer, looking at it first thing in the morning. Oh, maybe this isn't so important anymore. And you move it off to another quadrant, or, really thinking, maybe talking it with your at your one-on-one with your manager, like, oh, this is what I have. Are you thinking the same thing? What are you thinking? How is it for the team? So it's more of a collaboration, right? Mm-hmm. We're not in a silo.
Yeah. I love this idea because I was just imagining having this quadrant sitting on a piece of paper. I'm a person who likes to doodle and use my real pen, and just being able to say, if you're especially a task junkie, right? Like task after task, and busyness, meaning keeps you feeling important or capable or productive. This is a great way to say, all right, not today, maybe another day. And it doesn't become this overwhelm of, I have to conquer the world in 2 hours. So right. Thank you for this beautiful insight. And that leads me to the decision-making process. So how do we improve decision-making skills for better time management, which is something you just answered, but how can we take it to that next level?
Yeah, I think it is what you just said. I think it's keeping your visual in front of you, whatever that looks like. Again, it's going to be different for everyone. With the Eisenhower matrix, there's an actual visual, a template that you can fill out, or it's in a list format. Everyone is different, right? And once we have that, again, I think for ideal decision-making, it's really, okay, what's important right now? What is important right now? And what decision am I going to make? How am I going to make this decision? And I do also think it's important to know that we need to communicate with others. Maybe, like you said, we bounce it off a coworker because we have so many competing priorities. So how do we know that we're making that right decision? And so talking to the different stakeholders is really quite important before we make that decision, and also getting all the data, right? I think data is very important to help us make those decisions.
Absolutely. We need to have all the information and data to be able to make that full decision. Thank you first also for being here, Cheryl. What is your company called?
So I started a company called Simply Pause. You notice I use the word pause all the time. And so it really is to help organizations and individuals to learn how to take this pause, how to have this self-awareness and attend to ourselves with some compassion as well. And so, what does that look like? Everyone is different, but really creating that habit so we're not constantly running on autopilot, so we can make better decisions. So that is the whole intention of the business, is how can we make better decisions? And it's a full process, right? It's not just one of these, it all works together.
Yeah, I miss this conversation that we're having too. I'm trying to break up different aspects of it because we're going to learn just different, because when you hear just pause, everyone might have a different thought process about pause or mindfulness. And my goal is to, through this conversation, offer support, encouragement to those who are just looking for a shift in variety of different ideas that they may have. So what are some of the top habits of people who excel in prioritization and efficiency?
It's really turning off our notifications, having us make that, again, decision. We let us have the choice of when we want our attention to be pulled to something else, like our email or our phones or, our team's chat or social media, right? Just turning them all off, and then we can pick when we want to go there. So we're not so distracted as well. And also the communication with the people in our, whether it's our workplace or our personal lives, that's what we're doing, right? Because it takes a village, right? And so we need everyone's support to know that we're not just blowing them off or we're not ignoring. We're trying to really do what's right for us and the company, right? The organization as well. I talked about scheduling our email time, or even, our social media time, like scheduling it at different times and just kind of setting a timer even of like, okay, I'm going to do this for 30 minutes and then I need to move on, right? And then also I think scheduling deep, critical, and strategic work. We talked about this first thing in the morning. I think that's really, really important. And I think it's really important to really reset and go into what I like to call being mode, where, maybe we take half a day on a Sunday or, some time during the week to just be. Maybe we're out in nature. We don't have our phones. We're really just resetting, because this is a different form of productivity. And when we do this deep reset and being, we actually open up other parts of our brain that's responsible for creativity and innovation. And I get the deepest insights when I'm still and I am on retreat or I'm in nature and I just take those few hours. I know everyone might not have that, but even 3 hours, of just away from the phone, away from any screens, just for yourself. It's amazing what it can do. I've led many retreats and people on retreats, and they're just blown away of how slowing down has actually helped them so much, actually be more efficient and be more productive.
So you speak my language here. So we have now hybrid work environments. We have folks who are in the office. We have folks who are, working from home, sometimes collaborating. How would you, in team retreat situation, bring everyone together? And how would you, because, we perhaps have the same goals, but we're working so in detachment, right? We're not connecting. And I think connection plays a huge role. What are your thoughts about bringing people together, especially in hybrid work environments, and inviting them to connect and come up with their goals and core values?
That's such a great question. I do think we have a bit of a loneliness epidemic going on being remote, and there's a lot of advantages to being remote. So I think it's a great situation. But if your companies have the money, I think it's important to get people together at least once a quarter, especially for those companies that are global and everyone is remote, right? I think a quarterly meeting or a quarterly retreat is important, where you are talking to each other and really connecting in person to know coworkers in a different way, where you can talk about your strategic plan, your core values, the goals and the tasks, and really talk about this, maybe even fill the matrix out as a team together, who is responsible for what, right? So we all feel like we're in it together, because I think at the end of the day, we all just want purposeful meaning making work, right? And so I think that's really important. I know more and more companies are asking people to come into the office. And so maybe even taking one of those days, maybe once a month or once every other month, and then doing the same thing, maybe going off site. You and I, we live in a beautiful San Diego area. If there's companies in San Diego, right? Maybe just going to the beach for the day and doing some, team building. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. The ocean's free, for leaders and companies to make that effort. And then when when you are, day to day, you're meeting with people, really, checking in with people and understanding what people's values are. And so I think it's really important that our personal our values are our values, personal or professional. So, how can some of my personal values work into work? So for instance, compassion is a core value of mine. And when I was in finance, I loved my strategic finance, partners I had within the company, because many times the VPs of R&D, these, the most educated people I know got so anxious about the money. And here I was to help them, to support them. And that's what compassion is, to support people that maybe are struggling a little bit, And so I found that core value in my work, right? And sometimes people think, I can't have my core values or anything, but sometimes making money is supporting your core values, to travel, to provide for your family. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I really want to stress that, because I think sometimes people think, I don't have this deep purpose, but we can find it in there. And I think when we're remote or hybrid and we actually talk about this, it actually forms a connection with one another, right? When we're talking about, some of these values and how our teams and our daily tasks contribute to that. And then we get to know people on a personal level too.
I think it's important at work to have allies. And within our organizations, we spend so much time working with these other individuals, and collaboration goes a long way. And you spoke about bringing your core value. I know that in my work with many adults, they don't even know how to figure out what their core values are. And sometimes they're mistaken with things that they sometimes enjoy doing. How would we help someone who's listening to this podcast today to understand what is that first step to figuring out 1, 2, or 3 of your core values?
Yeah, I think first we need a list of core values, because I agree. I taught an undergrad course at UCSD, and we asked this question to undergrads, and we didn't explain what core values were. And they all were looking kind of like bewildered. And so I was like, do you all know what core values are? And they didn't. So it's such a great question. So, even if you go online and you Google core values, it'll come up with a whole list. Brene Brown has a huge list of them, right? And really, it's a deep reflection exercise, right? What is important to you? Is it your family? Is it your health, right? Is it your work? Is it money? There's no right or wrong answer. It's really different for everyone. And picking those core, and then once you know that, which might take a little bit of time, and again, it's going to change. Just because I have a core value of maybe travel right now, that might not be a core value in 5 years, right? So it's important to know it's going to constantly be evolving. But really taking that deep reflection, checking in with yourself when you look at this list of, okay, what is important to me, right? What is really, really important to me? Where am I spending my 3 biggest resources, my attention, my time, and my money? And really looking at it from that lens and understanding what is that. And that might change. Maybe today I say, it's these 3 things, but then I look at it again, look at it over, a month and say, oh no, maybe it's not that. Maybe this is more important because, and so, so I think it's really doing that inner work to understand what that is for you and how that translates into your work that you do, right? Every day. We spend 40 plus hours of doing sometimes.
So now, once someone figures out their core values, how do they align them with the goals at work? Because often we feel discouraged or disappointed with our match with a company, or maybe it's now leading us to stress and negative health. But how does one go about figuring out how they align their goals and values?
I think in a work situation, it's really important to have that communication with your manager or leader. Right? So to really understand what's the company's core values, and what are my core values, and finding the link somehow. Right? And then those goals go into just like our personal goals, right? So like, for instance, health is probably my first core value. So, okay, if my health is my first core value, my goal is to eat right, right? So that's my goal, whatever that is. So then what are the tasks that go into that? Okay, I'm going to meal prep salads on one certain day. So I make sure I have food to eat when I'm busy, right? I'm going to know that I'm going to go to the grocery store and do certain things, eat certain foods, and that's going to help me. So do you see how that went from core values to goals to tasks? And that's the same thing, at work. What are your core values? Okay. If it's sustainability, right? What is the goal? Like, what's a sustainable thing you can do at work? Okay. Maybe I don't use paper plates. I mean, it's a little example, but whatever that is. And then kind of creating that, what are the tasks then? How am I going to eliminate paper plates from my workplace? Right. Okay. Maybe I'll, talk to so-and-so or do that. So that's kind of how it goes. But again, they're tiny steps. Like I feel like when we try to do too much, we just get overwhelmed and we're like, forget it. I can't do this.
And the tiny things that you speak about, when you do them and when they're aligned with our values, that joy and satisfaction that we feel from that contribution, so this awareness, taking that action, creating a goal to achieve those is what you're beautifully sharing, helps us really invite us to avoid burnout and find joy in the work that we do. And this is beautiful. What are some of the other tips that you have in terms of mindfulness in a workplace or being aware of yourself in the workplace? I notice a lot of folks who literally feel torn between their family. I know it's communication, this balancing that doesn't exist. But how can folks, because we do have to go to work, and this is a profession you chose because you loved it at one point. And now it's sort of become a struggle. And that doesn't mean now you have to always leave your job. There is still a way to sort of back it up and figure out a different strategy. And what can people do if they're just kind of feeling discouraged at the moment?
Yeah. I think it's really important to learn what self-compassion is and practice it. Mm-hmm. And I think the way and self-compassion is more than self-care. Many people think it's self-care. It's more than that. It's, there's two sides. Dr. Kristen Neff is a huge self-compassion researcher, and I teach her program at UCSD. And what she says is there's two sides of compassion. There's this tender side that we accept that we feel a certain way. Okay, maybe we're not so happy at work and we have these emotions of sadness or, some difficult emotions. And we need to accept that because we need to accept where we're at in the moment. When I say accept in the moment. And then there's another side called fierce compassion, where it's more about action. Okay, I'm with myself and accepting it. Okay, so now what can I do? Can I change my mindset? Right? Can I start making some boundaries? I think setting boundaries is really important. Maybe, you're working such long hours and you really want to be with your family, or you just want to tend to yourself. You want to pick up that hobby or go play tennis or whatever it is. Can we set some boundaries of like, I got here at 7, I need to leave at 4, and being okay if you don't get that promotion then. So again, this comes back to your values. Like, are you okay with that? Or are you being effective and you don't need to work so many hours to get that promotion because now you have systems in place to work on the right things? So I think it's really, really important to, again, practice that self-compassion and make boundaries with yourself and others as well. And I think as far as throughout your workday, things like, especially your team, doing this like even 30-second pause before you start a meeting, I think is so crucial. So many people I've talked to have started implementing it. And, you think that a lot of people think it's like so weird to do that in their workplace, but it's actually not. A lot of people actually love it. When I start every one of my workplace programs with this 3-minute pause transition, and they're like, wow, that was good. It was challenging because my mind is racing, right? But you have self-awareness when we get still. And so practicing, maybe different pauses throughout the day, I have a watch. And so every hour it dings, I just take a few breaths. Like, I'm like, okay, how am I feeling right now? What's going on with me right now? Right. Oh, I haven't even ate lunch yet. Maybe I need to get up and go eat something. Right. So it's just these little things that, you don't have to go up and meditate for 45 minutes or anything. It's just really just taking that relief in throughout your day.
So Cheryl, as you were speaking, one of the things that comes to mind is Deepak Chopra talks about your body being your temple. Mm-hmm. And how often is it this mindfulness, just becoming aware of us? We're always focusing outside, other things, how we can contribute to others, how we can give. But that receiving part that you're speaking about, being mindfulness, I had interviewed Dr. Tanya Goodrich recently, and she's speaking about our pelvic floor. We are in such a rush and we run to the restroom and we don't give ourselves time. And we are contributor of illnesses to ourselves. And this mindful practice that you're speaking about is like, how am I feeling? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? What does my body need is a key component in really showing up at work and being effective. That you're just, it's like simple pause. It seems simple and it is difficult to do, yet achievable with practice, with intent, with true intent of moving forward. And I can't wait to hear from others who are listening to Now What Podcast or Jagged Edge, which this conversation happens to be because it's about workplace, and seeing if this makes an impact. And what are some of the companies doing? Like, what are some of the folks that you've taught? Which practices have they implemented in their workplace? Have they started a trend at work that's useful?
A lot of them, it's different for everyone. One participant said that they now go for a walk when they want to take a break, and they leave their phones at their desk. And they just kind of, I do this sense and savor walk where we're just kind of out in nature, really savoring, nature. And it could just be 10 minutes, right? When we're walking, as opposed to thinking, right? Other people have found turning off their notifications has really helped them focus better. Also, not multitasking, right, has really helped people, stay calm and not feel so, overwhelmed. A lot about mindful communication. Can we be present with ourselves? People, can they listen to understand instead of listening to respond, right? I think that's huge in the workplace. And, giving people their presence. A lot of people have found that was really nice in a conversation, when they're having that conversation as well. And so, those are some, a few things that people really appreciate and that they've taken away and really, created a habit.
I definitely appreciate each and every point that you just made. I teach empowering people in the workplace. And one of the things that we're talking about is listening. Are we defending? Are we blaming? Are we listening? And what does that empathetic listening look like, right? When we're listening, what is that other person trying to convey? What are the emotions? Are they asking us to fix it? And maybe even asking, right? Like that mindful, that pauses to kind of reflect without speaking, to say, what does that other person need? So it's, what do I need? What does the other person need? Can create this beautiful, harmonious workplace where the productivity can go up. Our health definitely goes up. Being able to collaborate and share tasks. All of those pluses that you just brought it to our conversation. And often we are not investing in companies on practicing this mindfulness. So hopefully, Cheryl, they will reach out to you and talk to you more about how do other companies get there eventually. Cheryl, what other insights you might have that I might have not talked about?
Well, I think when we talk about communication and we talk about this empathy and compassion, it's really important that we have really direct and transparent conversations that also are compassionate. And so that's when, sometimes we need to say things that, give critical feedback. We're doing it, the intent is so important, right? So we can do it with the intent that I'm doing this to help you, right? I'm not doing this to knock you down. And just having that two-way conversation. And to your point, really listening and really supporting your team and your people. And frankly, even in our personal lives, right? Relationships are such a big part of our lives. I mean, every single day. And some of them can have conflict. But can we really have an open mind and come from a place of curiosity? We're living in a world where everyone thinks it's black and white, your side versus my side. And it's not that way. We can still be curious and understand. We don't have to necessarily agree, but we can still try to understand. And maybe we'll learn something in the process.
Yes, absolutely. Love our beliefs. Everyone's beliefs matter. And we can all contribute in a meaningful way. And we can all belong with whatever we bring to the table. I really like the word acceptance. Truly, acceptance in a workplace can be really fulfilling. This conversation has been enlightening, educational, and empowering for me, Cheryl. Thank you for being a host on Jagged Edge Podcast. I'm truly grateful.
Oh, thank you for having me, Yogi. It was a lot of fun to be here with you.
Yes. And if you have any questions, reach out to either Cheryl, her last name is Shah, and I am Yogi Patel. Thank you for listening. If you like the content of this video, please don't forget to follow. And also, if you want more information, visit the website, yogipateltte.com.